Is live versus recorded.
Yeah, it's gonna be live.
Excellent.
All right, we are live for another episode of Real Estate Junkies Podcast. Today we have a very, very, very special guest, Leo Pareja, CEO of eXp Realty. Join us for this episode as we dive into the future of real estate sales industry with Leo, a true industry legend, from becoming the number one Keller Williams agent worldwide at just 28 years old to co-founding Washington Capital Partners and Remine, and now leading at eXp Realty. Leo's journey is nothing short of inspiring. Don't miss this chance to learn from one of the most influential executives in the residential real estate space. Leo, it is an honor having you on the podcast. Welcome, brother.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Appreciate the kind words.
Yeah, for sure. So I want to dive right in, right? So at the age of 28 years old, you became the number one Keller Williams agent. With all of that experience, right? Starting at 19 years old, what are you still doing here? Like, what are you still doing here? You should be somewhere disappeared, retired, gone, behind the scene. What are you still doing here as a CEO of eXp Realty?
So I think we're wired to do stuff as human beings. There's all kinds of data of people die within years of retirement, statistically speaking, versus people that stay engaged. Forget age. I just think it's just human beings like progress. I love information and data and psychology, and there's actually a book I read that explained that the most common thing that creates happiness and satisfaction is progress.
Mm,
So there's a bunch of data that said like the Industrial Revolution was actually really bad for mental health because human beings had to do the same thing over and over again. Versus if you take somebody like a carpenter who takes a piece of wood and delivers a piece of furniture over like a 6 or 7 week period, and you start at step one and go to completion. So doing stuff and taking on new challenges is, I think, the core part of being a human being and feeling self-actualized.
yeah.
In between selling Remine and starting at EXP, I did a lot of spearfishing, and I got really good at it. And I'm going tomorrow. But it was either that or I was going to buy a dive boat and open up a spearfishing outfit and scale it all over South Florida because that's just how my brain works.
Wow. Yeah, I truly believe that. Yeah, we are created to be creative. And if we are stuck doing the same thing over and over again, and most of us are, right? I believe probably over 80 to 90% of human civilization is stuck doing the same thing over and over again, especially since the industrial revolution, like you had mentioned. But what do you see? Where do you see the future of real estate sales going with that much experience in your back pocket, being inside of the real estate sales industry? Where do you see the industry going moving forward?
So, it's a super interesting question coming off of a 60-day 5 country tour, right?
Yeah.
Um, if people have listened to me talk, I'm pretty consistent, and I'm like doubling down on my thesis based on the amount of traveling I just did to 5 different countries. Is residential real estate is a different asset class than just about every other type of investment on the planet,
Mhm.
right? If you look at stocks, bonds, equities, yield driven real estate, you know, cap rate, a warehouse, all that kind of stuff. We are unique in the sense that we store human beings in residential real estate. So, a couple of reasons why that is very important and different, right? In an economic recession, like take the year 2000 in, Silicon Valley and the Dulles Corridor in the Northern Virginia area, data warehouses sat empty for
Mm.
years because the tech collapse didn't have the same demand for, that type of real estate asset. The office space collapse we're witnessing all over the
Mm.
country.
Yeah.
Um, but residential housing is a pure math problem of human beings and household formation to available inventory stock. And the third ingredient in that math problem is affordability. So Japan is probably one of the leading examples of an industrialized first world
Mm.
economy where they have more houses than people, right?
Wow.
68 million housing units, 60 million households, right? So, that is a different problem than what we have here. We don't have enough homes. And for the vast majority of economies that are expanding, that's the case. We didn't build enough homes in the last 10 years. So the reason I say that is because as long as there is a demand based on number of families in a country and homes available, there is a demand. And so what I think people overcomplicate, and again, this is my thesis that I've been saying for decades, and it's been recorded for a long time, is to say that, people move because of human condition. They don't move because you wake up and say, rates are perfect today. They don't. It's like,
it's more emotional.
You live by yourself or with a roommate. Typically, you fall in love with another human being. You decide to live with that other human being. And so you create a household. That's the actual census definition of a household.
Yeah.
That household normally is small. And after a while, you might make or adopt more humans and you need more space. Those humans get bigger. You need another place.
Yeah.
Those humans get big and leave and you need less space.
Mm-hmm.
Death, divorce, and a couple promotions along the way, typically, statistically, dictate the vast majority of all moves.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happens in that moment where you have to move, like your spouse is pregnant and you have a 1-bedroom, you need a 2-bedroom, you say, I have to move. And then you make the decision of going out into the marketplace and saying, okay, can I afford to buy or should we rent?
Mm-hmm.
And the move is necessary. And so it doesn't, like, the only decision tree is do you buy or rent, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And the rent depends on, or buy depends on affordability and access to housing stock, right? So the average human being does that 6 times in their life, 3 times as a renter, 3 times as a homeowner. And it's funny when I say that, most people go, oh, wow, that kind of tracks with what I've done, right?
Yeah.
And again, we're just average, mathematically speaking. So that process in most of the world is not simple.
Yeah.
And I would actually venture to say in none of the world, it's simple. It's expensive, it's emotional, and it has a lot of friction in it. And not because we want to be difficult, it's because of legalities and regulatory environments, right? Like to buy a house, lots of paperwork needs to be signed. Legal documents have to be drawn up in order to transfer that ownership. I just heard in the UK where we're the 5th largest estate agency, super fast is 60 days, but typically it's like 4 to 6 months to close, right?
Wow.
In the US, 30 to 45 days, right? Super fast is 10 days, but like 45 to 60 days is not uncommon, right? And that's after the marketing and sales process. That's just like the contractual to close, right? So highly infrequent, very expensive, friction full, and then lastly, highly emotional, right? I sold real estate personally as an agent in the DC metro market. I sold homes to sitting heads of state, private equity, government officials, people who negotiated for a living, and me included. We all turn into emotional putties when you're buying a home because it's for your family where you're going to raise your children. And I actually make the argument that your personal residence isn't an investment. It's like you buy the most you can afford in the most reasonably located part of town for your family. And that's what you buy, right? So there's so many moving parts that I personally believe you will always need that expert guide. And again, I say this a lot from stage. I equate it to in a technology full world, and this is super important to the question is like, we've seen tens of billions of dollars deployed into prop tech in the last decade. To get rid of the agent. Full stop. And most of those companies, if not all, either went out of business or did a full pivot to partner directly with the agents on the ground and or become a brokerage completely, right? Because that last mile of delivering on this service is super intense, right? Like, even, especially with the NAR settlement and like justifying fees, like I'm becoming hyper aware of like, can you communicate properly? Because we as practitioners kind of take it for granted, but like the average buy side transaction takes 80 to 100 hours. right? And there's surveys of people who did it by themselves and said, I'll never do that again. That was a full-time job, because it is a full-time job. So super long-winded answer for your question. I think the future of the industry still requires a local expert who's extremely well-versed in all the local nuances and the process. But obviously technology, I've witnessed in the 2 decades I've been in the business, completely changed the business. Like, so now I'm old enough, to say I wrote contracts on a 6-page contract that was pink, yellow, and white, and I pressed hard, and then I gave a copy to the other agent. Right? The advent of internet and email and digitization of the process in my career has sped up the process. Meaning that, like, when I listed a house in 2002, it would take about a week to not only put on the market, get it out into all the networks, and then people schedule showings and then go show it and get me an offer. Like, if I got an offer in 4 days, I was killing it, right? Like, you can now get an offer in like 30 seconds. You hit go, there's someone scraping portals. And let's say it's an institutional investor out of some big fund who generates a programmatic offer to you literally in minutes of you, if it hits their buy box, right? And then on a consumer side, like, they have an auto responder and they're nearby, they ask you to show it. You could theoretically show the house within an hour, write the contract
hitting the market,
on .loop,
hour to write a
phone,
contract and present it,
and send it over to you. So like, I've seen in my functional lifetime this much time. So I always think of technology as a compression of time. And so the agents, and this is something I've also said for 2 decades, is the agents that use technology put the agents that don't use technology out of business. And that's what I continue to bet on and continue to see. But, that expert guide, that local, Sherpa to guide somebody through the process is always going to be necessary.
Yeah, for sure. And there is a lot to unpack there, but I'll start. You mentioned, and that there is a topic I feel like a lot of people, real estate agents, brokers, are ignoring right now, either intentionally or unintentionally, is the big, private equity funds coming in, buying up residential real estate, right? Like, how do you see that as, without going into like the conspiracies of, who's behind it and all of that? Like, where do you see, the goal behind?
Yeah. So no, I do not prescribe to the conspiracy theory. It's just a pure function of capital allocation on the planet. Right. So pre-financial crisis, residential real estate was not considered an institutional grade asset. Almost 99% of rentals were owned by mom and pop investors. Come the financial crisis, and we had thousands of properties all over, the country that were languishing. And people operationalized platforms to acquire them, repair them, manage them. It was called scattered site management, right? Like, big capital was good at, bunch of roofs, bunch of air conditionings under one roof, right? Versus if you have 300 in one town to manage, that's a very different ask. With that said, now we have capital and infrastructure, like vendors who can property manage, repair, source, product, fix at scale, right? Because it was necessary for the banks. So if you look at the data, and I actually just made a Facebook post, which I encourage people to go read, where I talk about the percentages. And so the 2023, if I'm remembering what I wrote and researched for the post, something close to like 27, almost 30% of transactions in 2023 were investors, and year to date. The interesting part of that is that only 2 or 3% of that were actually institutional funds.
So the rest of them are still private investors and
small investors are defined by these same people watching the data as less than 10 and on average 3 properties.
Wow.
So the vast majority of rental properties in this country are still owned by your neighbor, you and me, right? People that you don't think, like, the like, plain and simple is capital always looks for a yield, right? When properties were depreciated 11, 12, 13, 14, and money was cheap, 2, 3, 4%, they produced a yield that was acceptable to the investors.
Yep.
Actually, right now, I think those funds are probably net sellers of houses.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that because I talked to them, right? Because guess what? It's 7% and 500,000. That probably
There's not much profit there for them. Yeah. And they're money driven. They're not your, mom and pop investors who are still, even though they're investors, mom and pop investors are still emotional investors.
Well, so that's a good point that I built my entire career on. Like, I always was fascinated when people said, "Hey, call me if you have a deal." What's a deal? What's a deal? Right? Like, is it because you're buying up in your neighborhood cash and you just like the proximity? So like I knew one investor that I sold houses to who probably made a 1 or 2% yield, but he had a high cash producing, like net cash business. And he didn't his kids weren't interested in the business, so he didn't have a succession plan. And so he would buy $500,000 teardowns, build new. So basically have like a $1.2, $1.4 million, and he'd rent them out, which again, on a cap rate basis, it would have been like a 2%.
Doesn't make
but
sense.
He did it in cash. There were like $6,000 or $7,000 a month rentals, and in the DC area, and he predominantly rented out to like embassy people.
Yep.
So rent was guaranteed, and they were super careful with the homes. They were like ranking officials at other country embassies, and he said it was super low maintenance. They were all like within a mile of his house, 2 miles of his house. And he said he paid cash for him, and it was a really good kind of like succession plan for his family's wealth.
So he was parking his money, right? He was pretty much parking.
But again, like you and I would not think that's a deal.
Yeah.
But he did.
Yeah.
Right. And then there's other people who want to flip houses, and if it's all cash, it's different than if you're using hard money. Right. So like a deal to someone using private capital is probably 70% LTV or ARV. But if you're paying cash like 80%, it's still the same net deal. Right. So I've always encouraged agents to actually take investors to lunch and say, what is a deal? What's the difference? And the script for that would be, if I were to come across a motivated seller who needed to sell quickly, I want to understand what your buy box is, right? And then you start building a list of legitimate buyers.
Yep. And we all love investors. I've probably done over 400 to 500 investor transactions myself. And it's much easier because a lot of those investors, they think one way. And as long as you can discover that, right? Like, what is their deal, right? What is the deal to them? It's much easier to serve investors versus someone who's emotionally thinking. And one day they're thinking this way, next day they're thinking different way, right? Now, let's talk about technology and AI, right? So how do you think, of course, you mentioned, right, since you started to now, right, the process of buying and selling houses have sped up because of technology, because of internet, because of smartphones, right? Now, with AI and everything that's coming out, and of course, you have much more exposure than I do on that end, talking to all the people that you talk to. How do you see technology and AI shaping the future of real estate sales business?
So and again, I feel like this has been correct at the macro level most of my life. The people overestimate in the short term and underestimate the long term, right? So I think AI is a significant shift in technology, and I think it's as big of a shift as the internet and mobile. Those to me are the two biggest I've lived through.
Yeah.
Right. High speed communication, and then having it in your pocket, right? Like that untethered us from location. That's actually, those are the two necessary ingredients that Glenn Sanford said we needed to build EXP.
Yeah.
Right. High speed internet, and then the ability to work from anywhere. So, but in both of those examples, it was like the day it came out, it didn't change the world.
Yep.
But now we look back and go, oh my God, everything's different because of it. So that's what I think is going to happen. And so to say, what's it going to look like in 5 years? If 10 years ago we talked about what mobile would be, we like the first version of the iPhone actually physically, dimensionally, layout wise is almost the same, but that we're about to probably get this number 16 here.
Yeah.
It's different, right? Like I actually call it the remote control of our lives, right?
Yep.
Like it's
Functionality is
it's the
completely
key to
night
my
and day.
car now, right?
Yeah.
Legitimately.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's what I think is going to happen with AI. Having lived through these experiences, I think the only thing we can do is be like, you can't say, "Oh, the world's going to end," right? Skynet's here. It's more of like play with it, taste it, see how it affects your life. So,
Yeah.
like, I can share personally, I actually go to ChatGPT more than Google now, right? Because I like contextual conversations.
Yep.
That's
Yep.
to me the beauty of LLM. It's an actual
Yep.
contextual conversation, and I have the 4.0, so I talk with it. But I would encourage people to just always be in curiosity, like
Yep.
being the extreme, like all in, and you this virtual representative of you is going to do your work. I don't think. I think at the end of the day, we're you know tribal
Yep.
species that like
Yeah.
other human beings, right? There's data that says we go crazy isolated, but I think AI will accelerate stuff just like
Yeah.
mobile and the internet did, right?
Yeah.
Um, so the impacts of it we won't see, but again, like on the back end, I know how we're attempting to use it and look at it where it's like, okay, where like my obsession and processes is anything I have a human do in a repetitive nature,
Mhm.
can I automate? For two reasons. One, there's extremely high burnout rate on human beings,
Yep. Yep.
opening the conversation for repetitive behavior. And two, it's imperfect, right? Like anytime I rely on a human being, like if I need someone to hit report, copy paste, Excel, input somewhere else, there's going to be breakage and I don't like it. Like,
Yeah, they might make a mistake. They might paste the wrong thing, right?
so like document review, right? So AI is changing that. Like, and again, the adjacent things I've seen, it's like they're saying that the AI reading scans from doctors are
Yeah.
better, right? Because so that kind of stuff. I think AI will accelerate, compress
Yeah.
all the stuff we've seen the other pieces of technology, but my thing to human beings, not agents, it's stay curious, right? Like my dad's 81 and he uses it, right? And the other true story, I was with my dad on Monday and I said, which AI do you like better? Or like, how do you like ChatGPT? He's like, I think I like Grammarly better. He literally said that to me because my dad writes a lot.
Mm.
So, I think the one thing, advice for everybody is like, some people are just intimidated by it or like, it's
Yeah.
not for me or I
Yeah.
don't see the applications. Just play with it. Like it
Yep.
reads images,
Mm.
right? Like a super real estate example. I'm remodeling a bunch of bathrooms in my house and our master vanity. I couldn't find a picture online and I got really frustrated. I just measured everything. And I said, hey, 112 inches, his and hers, make a vanity in the middle,
Yeah.
generate
That's
me
amazing. Yeah.
an image. I didn't like the first one. I gave it a follow up. I ended up probably by image 5. I literally gave it to a carpenter, and it's in
Mm.
my bathroom now. Right,
Wow.
like I
Wow.
designed the vanity to my master bath
Yeah.
with just me and ChatGPT. Right.
Yeah, I mean, this
So,
conversation itself, right? Like, so what we used to do is take bios of whoever we're interviewing, right? Based on their experience, we would craft the questions we're going to ask. But today, it's basically what I literally do. Our process is when we have someone book on the calendar, we have asked them for their bio, and we just feed the bio to ChatGPT and say, "Hey, give us questions that are more that are relevant to his bio." But more there are better chances of going viral with this content. So all the questions I'm asking you is written by ChatGPT, and it knows your background, so it knows what questions you would be good at answering.
well, it's and again, in a large language model, the more information, like ChatGPT knows me very well, right?
Yeah.
Like that was one of the things I was like, who is Leo Pareja? What's it like? I was like, oh wow, that's kind of crazy because it's
I know.
access to the entire internet,
And
and
this is
and those
just the
models have
beginning,
what
right?
I've said in
Yeah.
videos, right?
Yeah. It could pick up on that, but this is just the beginning, in my opinion. ChatGPT is kind of like Linux, like you remember the green screen computers, like with the green writing, no pictures,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
That's where we are with AI right now. And if what we are like stuff we are doing inside of our real estate business with custom GPT, we have built out chatbots that can convince a tenant to buy, that can take a buyer lead that is a stranger to a booked appointment. Seller, same thing for sellers. It could convince that FISBO expired or withdrawn. to book a seller appointment, right? Stuff that is possible already. I could only imagine like what else could be possible. You could build out, especially with the virtual workspace like we are right now, right? With AI, you could build out much more faster, more detailed infrastructure than what humans were able to do, right? Like how we have built it out with humans. Now, um, let's talk Zillow, right? Like I have to ask these questions to you, right? Zillow or any other, I don't want to single out Zillow, any other lead generation portals, right? That are, historically, well, if we look at it, becoming dominant, right? Players in the market. Do you think this will lead to a monopoly, or how should agents prepare for this shift?
So if we, and again, I love data, right? I think that, like, even look at us, we're the single largest brokerage on the planet, but in the US, like, single largest brokerage by 2 or 3x number 2,
Mhm.
we're still like 4.2%, right? So I don't think like, they're almost un-American by choice in the US, right? Like, if you look at Canada, the 4 largest banks control 80% of the loans. Rocket Mortgage probably has like 5 or 10%. Like, nobody in the US market tends to become a dominant player.
Mhm.
And I would say, especially in the real estate industry, like, understanding deeply the requirements to be licensed and not like there will always be the one person brokerage shop. There truly will.
Yeah.
Like, and even if there's a crazy advent of AI, that one special human being will learn it too, and he'll just be a one person band. Like, that's part of the fabric of real estate.
Yeah.
I don't ever think, like, so I think we're disproportionately well positioned for the shifts coming between technology and regulatory, NAR, DOJ.
Mhm. Yeah.
Because our model is asset light, it's scalable up and down. So, like, I obsess with that. That's what I spend most of my days
Yeah.
thinking through 24 months from now. And, like, I say, one of the hardest things about being an entrepreneur, you have to live in the cloud and the dirt, right? That's a Gary Vee quote, but it's very real in the sense of, like, hey, what's the future state of what you just said about your lead funnels converting? But at the same time, like, do you have a showing at 2:00, right? And how do you balance that? So,
Yeah.
I don't think anything is winner take all. I mean, like, pure software plays like an Amazon or a Facebook, right? I think they have, like, what, 3 or 4 billion unique visits, like,
Yeah.
MAUs, monthly active users. That's like unheard of on the
Yeah.
planet.
Yeah.
But that was a pure platform play versus, like, this, by intrinsically, it's hyper local. Hyper local. And again, I'm even more invigorated about that thesis because I just spent so much time abroad as well, right? So,
Yeah.
my answer is, look, ultimately, people join people, right? Like, you could have the coolest tech, but if that's not your tribe, like, who think like you and
Mhm.
concentrate on the same things as you do, it's not the same.
So what I hear you say is the biggest disadvantage portals like that have is the hyper local aspect that real estate agents have advantage of, and they should really double down on being hyper local and becoming that hyper local expert to the consumers. So consumers, when it comes to making a decision on who I'm going to use, they're going to use the expert that is hyper local. Is that what you're saying?
And again, I'm just going on past performance of data, right?
Yeah.
And this is another thesis that I kind of live by, which is use yourself as a sample size of one, right? I think as human beings, especially business owners, we all of a sudden, like, take off our consumer hat on and just think of, like, they and them,
Mhm.
right? Like, people like, do this, do that, do this. I'm like, does that
What
work
would
on
you
you?
do?
Does that work on you?
Yeah.
Like, and I think that's a super powerful way of seeing, like, perfect example, I say, from stage. I am 5'11", 190 pounds. I got a beard. Like, there's literally 2 of us on this call that fit that description, right?
Yeah.
So, like, if you take yourself as, a male in your 40s, father,
Yeah. Yeah.
husband, all that, dude, there's like 80 million of us at
Yep.
any given point in
Mhm.
a country, right?
Yep.
So, I know what works on me because I'm a consumer of products and services. Like, when someone's like, like direct mail works? I'm like, yeah, at a very small percent. Like, not saying don't do it. I'm just saying I know what I do with mail, and I open it over the trash, right? So when I'm evaluating something, I always like to use myself as a sample size of one. So that's actually what I said to people, like,
Yep. Yep.
genuinely, would that work on you?
Yeah.
Start
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. Now with the
And
NAR settlement, right? And I know your take on it, just to quickly go over that, is that of course there are brokers, agents out there like, oh, nothing's gonna change, that mindset, right? And then there is, like, people like you who are preparing the market for it, right? Like, how do you see, is there a merit behind this settlement? Is it gonna make any change to the industry, or how the agents operate, or how the consumers behave?
So I'll answer. You didn't ask
Yeah.
this question, but I'll answer it this way. So there are people that literally think nothing's going to change, and then there are other people who think that the end of the world and 70% of the agents are going away. And I'm not in either camp. I've operated my entire life under a philosophy of I just want to understand the rules of the game so I can play the game, right? And so the other thing I've seen a lot and I talk a lot is there's been some really strong feelings, which are completely warranted, right? Like I will say this on record because I say it all the time. Is like, look, we all got a real estate license and started practicing real estate. I feel that it's almost like we turned 16, got a driver's license, got on the highway, and now you're saying we were doing something wrong. It's like, what are you talking about? Like, this is literally the system that we were taught.
Yeah.
And that's how I feel about it. Now, saying this is unfair and all this stuff, like, I'm not saying I don't feel that way, but my concern is, okay, what are the new rules of engagement and how do I support my business partners who are the agents in being able to serve people? Because I truly think that the value and service a local expert in the market delivers is necessary and needed. And so my whole concern is operationalizing the tools you will need in order to serve people. So I just go to the data, right? What do you need in order to thrive with the new rules of engagement? And I've narrowed it down to one sentence, which is treat your buyers like you treat your sellers, right? So if I'm and on the agent side, I just say, because I think where a lot of fear comes from is uncertainty and people saying, what happens next? And they start imagining stuff from zero. And I say, that's unnecessary. Just look at the listing side. For the 2 decades I've been in the industry, we've had multiple compensation models for agents, for sellers, right? Flat fee, a la carte, percentage basis, limited service, full service. It's all been there. Today, sellers can go to Zillow, FSBO their home on Zillow, where all the eyeballs are, which is part of the argument of the litigation that with portals we don't need what we do. And Zillow has a report that I want to say it's dated 2023, but I think it's the 2022 data set. I don't know that the 2023 data sets have come out, that said that 36% of sellers who attempted to sell their home in that year attempted to do it themselves,
and then started
but only 11% finished. Wow. Meaning that more than 2/3 of the original cohort of attempted FSBOs ended up with an agent. So if I just take that data and say, okay, post August 16th, there will absolutely be some people who said, you know what, I'm going to do this myself.
Yeah, that number might go up. That 36% might go up, but also
but that's on the seller side. I'm talking about the buyer side.
Oh, okay.
On the buyer side, right? Because right now, for as long as you and I've probably been selling real estate, there's just been this, co-op system, right? Where people say, well, I'm gonna do it myself. I don't need an expert. My gut is that it's going to look a lot like FSBOs on the seller side, where a percentage of them are going to attempt to do it. A percentage of that subset will be successful. But looking at the seller data, I think a larger subset of that of the original group will say, dude, that's a lot of work. That's a full-time job. I'm now going to interview experts, pick one and pay them for their time. That's what I think is going to happen.
Yeah, definitely. I see it that way too. But also, uh, the data that a lot of people don't see, right? Like whether you are buyer or seller, is that how much money FISBO loses out on for not using an expert, right?
And again, I feel like the data on that is wide ranging.
Yeah,
I've heard as much as low as 10% and as much as like
18%.
20 or
Yeah,
30%, right?
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
you
yeah,
know, if the average is 400,000 that they sell at 310 or something
yeah,
crazy.
yeah.
Um, but yes.
So it's safe to say buyers, when they go about doing it themselves, they're probably comparably going to pay 5%, 10% more compared to if they were to use a real estate agent to negotiate on their behalf, right? By default. That argument can be also made by a buyer's agent to their consumers is that, hey, when you use me, I could save you 10%. So even if you end up paying me 3%, you're still making money, right? In that
Well,
transaction.
and what you just articulated is just the muscle that we've developed on the seller side, right?
Yeah,
Like if you're a good listing agent, you know those stats.
yeah,
You say, hey, you could sell it yourself, but on average, I executed X and FISBOs in this area executed Y. So, you know, if you pay me my fee, you're typically 5 or 10 or 15% better, right?
yeah. Hmm.
Because the reality, I was a really strong listing agent, and I would sit down with a seller and say, just so you know, I buy real estate all the time. Like actually, the home I'm in, I negotiated. I rented it first, and then I bought it from the landlord. Like whatever number he said, I was like, well, the first thing we're doing is there's no listing agent involved, so I'm not paying that, right? So that's already priced into the market,
Yeah, yeah.
right? So that's you know, I think the winners of the future are the
Hmm.
ones who can articulate their value proposition, and
Yeah.
that's actually something I say. Like the two largest MLSs, Bright MLS and Sierra MLS, put out data on concessions, and it said that 55% in the last 6 months of the transactions had concessions negotiated.
Hmm.
Right, so like I'm telling agents, know
Yeah.
your numbers, right?
Yeah.
Like, do you know what the average concession you've negotiated in the last 24 months has been? Because
Mhm.
if you can say to a consumer,
Yeah.
out of 20 buyers I've represented, 60% of them, I've gotten them 4% concessions
Yeah.
on average.
That's
Like,
social proof, right? That's social proof. You are backing your
and
claim
and,
with
and that's
data.
more, that's statistical data, right?
Yeah.
Like whatever the fee you're going to ask for
Mhm.
compared to the value you're delivering
Yes.
becomes a
Yes.
very important part of the conversation.
Yes. I love it. Love that conversation. Now, many real estate, let's talk brokerage, right? Many real estate companies are trying to mimic the model, right? EXP has done over the last, over a decade, right? What do you think? I guess like in this new brokerage economy, right? The rev share economy, whatever you want to call it, right? Stock incentives, like this new cloud-based brokerage models. What are we doing as EXP to kind of stand apart from those copycat models? And what are your
Yeah. So
thoughts on those
so
models?
so 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 a couple things. The first one is that it's proof that we are the new way of doing business, right? If you look at where the growth's happening, so you can almost see an evolution from like big corporate owned companies in the 50s or local ones to then the franchises and Remax inventing a cap and then KW improving
Mhm.
on it with profit
Yeah,
share.
yeah,
The big shift to the cloud-based brokerage is taking what someone and I actually look at rev share and stock compensation as a more aligned model to what franchising did, right?
mhm,
Because when you were a franchisee and the franchisor relationship, I think it's a little confrontational or not the same page where the franchisor makes the money off the franchisee. So you're really not
yeah,
on the same page,
yeah,
right? Like you owe a franchise fee no matter if you're profitable or not. That's doesn't always feel so good,
yeah,
right? So what my interpretation of what Glenn did, so not to put words in Glenn's mouth, is like, listen, I'm going to take what I would have paid for that part of the business, like you know, incentive fees or like deep layers
well,
of
yeah,
leadership, like regional directors and recruiters and all that stuff, and just say, hey, this is the money I would have deployed on that. Let me make the incentive super interesting so we're on the same page.
mhm,
But most importantly, making asset light. Like if
yeah,
you were to buy a region or a franchise from any brand, you're signing 5, 10 year leases, right? You're employing 2 or 3 or 4 staff people,
mhm,
right? Day one without any money, right? You have to have X amount
yeah,
of dollars in the bank and
yeah,
all that kind of stuff. So I think this new model is the future
mhm,
because it allows for organic growth, right?
Yeah.
We've seen some companies raise lots of money and then pay big checks.
Yeah.
But that's kind of a treadmill versus this was a sustainable model that we built.
Mhm.
So, I said it earlier in the conversation, no one gets to 50% market share,
Yeah.
right? Like if we get to 10%, that'd be ridiculously good, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
No single brokerage ever has gotten to as big as we are. And I think we're just getting warmed up.
Mhm.
So I think there's room for many flavors of ice cream.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, people join people.
Mhm.
I think we're unique because we have the most productive, best entrepreneurs in the space, and not
Mhm.
just by opinion, but I'm talking about production units and
Yeah.
kind of proof is in the pudding. Um, so for me and for us, it's always trying to identify, who we are and who we're attracting, and obviously staying fiercely competitive and in the
Yep.
forefront, right? Like, so
Mhm.
never assuming we're finished, right?
Yeah.
Like we've never arrived. It's like,
Mhm.
is the value prop there? Can we improve upon it? Is there better technology, better education, better systems? But the one part that I talk about all the time is the platform. So if you choose RevShare, if you choose, because, and again, I talk about this all the time, the vast majority of the agents at our company or KW or any of the copycat brokerage, cloud brokerage companies don't actually recruit.
Mhm.
Like the attraction choice, to me is akin to the people who bought franchises like KW, Remax,
Yep.
at the Anywhere brands. It's a small percentage of the population. It's like
Yep.
single digits or low teen digits. So the vast majority of the people are going to be at the company where they sell real estate, and that has to be a frictionless, excellent experience. And that's my
Yeah.
core obsession, which I call operational excellence. Like,
Yep.
can I pay you faster? Can I answer your broker questions faster? Can I make onboarding smoother?
Mhm.
Like that is actually the 80 or 90% of my time,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And so making sure that if you do choose RevShare, did you watch my interview with Brian Carruthers?
No, I have not. Yeah.
It's on our YouTube page at EXP, and he's probably the most prolific, attractor in multi-level marketing. He wrote
Yep.
Building an Empire and Untrapped. He actually picked a 25-year-old company when he joined. He's been with them for almost the same amount of time, so they're in the 50-some-year-old company. And he actually talks about that. He's like, listen, in the multi-level marketing, like the pitch that you hear all the time is ground floor. And
Yeah.
he says,
I was like, we are a ground floor opportunity.
yeah, but that's not unique to our industry. That's
Yeah. Yeah.
across all industries that have MLM component to it.
Mhm.
And he says MLMs fail at the same rate or higher than other companies,
Mhm.
right? So if you are going to spend 2, 3, 5, 10 years building your business, you're actually trusting our
Mhm.
platform
Yep.
to be there in 10 years,
Mhm. Yeah.
right? So the thing I say to people is, please fundamentally understand that the economic model of the core business is sustainable. And
Yeah.
if companies are public, you can see their math. Like, do they lose money every time they sell a home? And listening to their earnings calls, they're there for you to hear it in the founder and CEO's words,
Yeah.
right? They say, hey, we're going to make money on title and mortgage and attached services. Like every real estate company in the world has attempted to do that at scale. And it's
Yeah.
the reality is the top performing entrepreneurs are now in business locally with their own opportunities
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
vertically integrate. So my suggestion, humble suggestion to everybody is truly understand the numbers, because building a RevShare organization at any multi-level marketing company on the planet, whether it's cosmetics or healthcare or legal services or real
Mhm.
estate,
Yeah.
you are making a very real trust bet
Yeah.
that company is going to be there to honor the system they promised you.
Yeah. Yeah. And so another question in that line, thinking about all the other models that are coming about, right? What would happen is what would get exposed, because everyone's claiming that, hey, our agents are stockholders and they are owners into the company, right? But at the same time, how do you draw the balance, right? Like it's not rocket science to understand that real estate brokerage economy end consumer, sure, the buyers or sellers are consumers, but end consumer is also the agent themselves, right? So in that economy, how do you draw the balance between, okay, we are serving the agents, but also agents are also part owners in the company? Like, how do you draw that balance?
So I'm not sure I'm understanding the question and the answer that you're looking for, but I'll give you the one I'm interpreting, and then you
Yeah.
tell me if I missed the mark. So first of all, anytime that anyone's offering equity, and I've built several companies, there's a very big distinction between private stock and
Mm,
public stock
mm,
with liquidity, right? So private companies have lots of restrictions on who and how you can sell the stock. There's typically not a open marketplace for it. And then that's just kind of startup land 101 with equity. There's restrictions on it, who you can sell it to. There's ROFRs on it. There's all kinds of restrictions. So any equity you're being offered in a company, I would really understand the liquidity method to redeem that.
mm,
So public companies, much easier than, and again, I'm even 20 years ago when I had a KW franchise ownership, it was in an LLC to that local, and it was very illiquid, right? Like
mm,
being able to redeem it for cash was
yeah.
virtually
Mm,
impossible. I had to have only a small group of people have eligibility to buy. So versus a public company. Um, and so to me, the way I think about it, when I look at our ownership structure,
yep.
70 some percent of our company is owned between Glenn original leadership founders and agents, right? So we do have a very real public float,
Mhm,
but a good portion of the stock is still owned by agents, right?
mhm,
And
yep.
continually owned by agents. So the coolest part about being here and kind of experiencing the culture is there's really a real tangible feeling of ownership.
Yep.
And it's not kind of like rah, go team. It's like, no, I own tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars of this equity and I deeply care,
Mm,
which
yep.
is phenomenal. It's a super cool feeling because like when people call me, they genuinely care.
Mhm,
Um, but again, it's also understanding who you serve. Like I'm not confused. I'm a platform that allows real estate entrepreneurs
mm,
to build whatever size dream they want. You hear me say that over and over again.
yep.
My customer and partner are the agents, right? Like
Let's
I'm
go.
not
Like, I love to hear that. Yeah. Like
I'm not
being
consumer
upfront and
facing. Like
transparent about that, you know? Yeah.
100%, right? Like I'm the operating system. You sound very technical. I want to be the operating system to your business, right? Like
Yep.
friction, less process
Mhm,
to allow you to build. And like I'm super vocal about that. Like I love being in business with Justin Haver and Avery Call, right? Number one in the US, number one in Canada, both number ones globally, one in units, one in volume. But I'm also super ecstatic to be in business with the agents doing 10 and 15 deals,
yep,
right?
yep. Mhm,
And like what I love about this business is it's a business you get to own. Like there's
yeah,
no right or wrong, right?
yeah,
Like I always say, understand that, small business ownership should be for lifestyle
mhm,
optimization, right?
mhm,
Like different if you're trying to tell me you're building a unicorn to go public, right? But if
yep,
like most small to mid-sized businesses, SMB definition, you should be optimizing for income and lifestyle,
yep,
right? And I say this when I'm with mega teams and kind of give them a hard time sometimes. Like some of the most profitable business in real estate are a solo producer,
mhm, yep,
right?
they
Someone
are,
who sells
yeah.
for 20 to 50 homes with maybe one VA and makes $500,000 net, right?
Yeah.
They're probably working really, really hard and like 12 hours a day, 6 days a week.
Yep.
But like if you look at like net income and margin, probably some of the most profitable businesses that can exist.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I myself in 2020, I sold 90 houses myself, single agent with an ISA and a TC. 2021, I started a team and I got out of production. We sold 120 homes. Yes, I wasn't working 16, 17 hours a day anymore, but my profitability tanked, right? Like I spent a lot more money, resources, energy, right? Focus into training and coaching agents that I
Well,
probably could have produced more if I used that same time and
but
energy into just
so
selling.
so super good point to make. And I always say like I just wrote a post about that. I call it the team or not the team, right? Like that is a leadership business building journey, which again may or may not be something somebody wants, and just understanding that it is, and then also understanding that it's going to be like 2 steps back to hopefully take 5 steps forward.
Yeah.
But some people take the 2 steps back and never get back to the same level of profitability. I just listened to an agent in a mastermind share that he had a 20-person team, got completely burnt out, fired everybody. Super kind of
Very common.
contrary,
Yeah.
but very different approach. Like
Yeah.
he went and identified a showing service where, flat fee to unlock doors with licensed agents. So he's got more upfront expense now, but he doesn't physically leave his house if he doesn't want to. And he said his COGS, his cost of goods sold on splits, it's effectively like 6%.
Wow.
Like think about it, on a commission, instead of 50-50, it's like 6%. It's like $45 or $50 a showing, which again, if they see a bunch of homes like upfront, you're kind of writing checks for maybe a couple $1,000 bucks. But he says when the deal closes, like his whole process is he's got a bunch of VAs that help with the lead funnel conversion, gets them to an appointment on Zoom, gets them to a conversation like this. And again, I've always said this, like play the hand that you're dealt. When I was 19 and didn't have a team, my exact pitch was, listen, if you go with the big team, you're never going to talk to so-and-so, right? Like you get me and you get me your undivided attention. I got nothing else going on. So you got me, like I work for you. Right. And so he'll use a script like, hey, if you go with that other team, like you're going to get the person who just passed their test 6 months ago. You're not going to get the name. He's like, I will do all the really important stuff, the negotiation, this. He's like, I have this network of people who will help me show the house. And, at the time of home inspection, I won't be there. You'll be meeting with a licensed contractor, home inspector who can, if you want to walk, he'll just tell you, and I'm not even there to influence it. So I'm not going to interfere with the process.
Yeah.
And he said that he closed like 150 homes last year, netted more money than when he had a team. And he was like traveling half the year. So he was taking these virtual consultations from Europe and, the Northeast, not in there with their kids, and they were traveling half the year. So again, not right or wrong, just so many different ways to, and like, that's actually my point. Like, some of the top teams in our company make ridiculously good margins because they're business owners, but like in their head, they're not just a realtor. They're a business owner, right? That has a staff and has a big overhead and have marketing funnels and conversions. And like, their team's making tens of millions of dollars in GCI, right? So like if you're a 10, 12, $15 million revenue business, like, dude, on the grand scheme of like economic ladders, there's very few businesses that get past $1 million in gross revenue per year. And I'm not talking about volume. I'm talking about gross commission as company dollar, right? So no right or wrong. It's just what you want to do with your time in life.
And it's all solving a problem. That's what makes us entrepreneur, right? Solving a problem inside of the business that makes the business grow, right? And so you think outside the box, the opportunity presents itself, or the struggle presents itself, right? You adapt, you pivot, right? So now I want to, we're running out of time here, right? So I want to quickly put you on the hot seat, talk about eXp Realty. And there's a lot of agents that we train and coach inside of our academy. They're also part of eXp, right? And we are part of eXp. And so I'm familiar. So far, I've been with eXp 2 years now, and I'm familiar with a lot of objections or reasons why agents leave. So I want to kind of ask you a few of those questions, right? Or concerns that agents come up with, and see what are your thoughts on that. So number one is some agents are, or if not some, almost most agents feel overwhelmed by the tech-heavy environment, right, with eXp. So what would you say to agents who are feeling overwhelmed when they come to eXp and they feel like, oh my God, there's so many things that I need to learn, so many tools that I need to get familiar with, and a lot of them don't even understand what tools help them accomplish what, right? So what is your take on that?
So again, everything in life is point of view. I would say a technologist by bent, since I built software companies and like I like tech. But I get the question all the time in a different line of questioning, like, what's the best CRM? What's the best lead? Like, what's the best tech for this? And my answer is always the one you will use. Right. So one of the things that I obsessed with when coming here was simplification, and again, frictionless. So what does that mean? Like, if you have a broker question, you can meet us in the world, but you can also chat us. You can also call us. You can jump on a Zoom, right? So we've really streamlined, appreciating, understanding that we still have multiple avatars. So, right, we have some of the youngest, most tech-leaning realtors,
Mhm.
and we have a lot more of the average statistical NAR, agent that
Yeah.
exists, which
Yeah.
traditionally is not as tech-leaning,
Mhm.
right? So for us, it's, look, I want to meet you to where you're at
Yeah.
and use what you need. So, like, one of the questions you're asking is kind of one that I deal with all the time. Like, how do I tell you guys stuff, right? Because just like I told you a sample size of one, like, we're all numb to text and emails and everything. Like,
Mhm.
they say like part of our brain doesn't even see this part of the screen anymore because of banner ads in the early 2000s. So when you join a company, and ours is, with agents and staff is touching 90,000, that's larger than the average American city,
Mhm.
right? So I actually like to give that analogy of like, hey, we're bigger than the average city. And so when you join a city, like, you're not going to figure it all at day one, right?
Yeah.
Like, look, you might want to know where the bank and the hospital are and your home
Yeah.
and the kid's school,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it's going to take you 6, 12, 18 months to find all your favorite restaurants, where the parks are. So, for me, it's like, okay, when you get on board, um, you know, hopefully someone you like and trust is the one who introduced you to the company. Ask that person to kind of show you around what's important
Mhm.
to you first, like
Yeah.
hospital, bank, kid school, your home, like
Grocery
the
store.
things. Yeah, like let's get the basics, and then on the weekends or wherever you have some time, go explore the city.
Yeah.
Right, like we have all kinds of super cool stuff,
Yeah.
that people who've been here a long time are like, it'd be great if we had this, and I'm like, dude, I put that in place 2 years ago. And so again, and it's like a constant
Yeah.
communication where I have like, yeah,
Yeah.
I was on with someone yesterday who she was like, I was like, hey, just because they gave me the same feedback, I was like, do you feel like you read everything? Do you? He's like, yeah. I was like, did you know we have this? She goes, no, I didn't know that. And I'm like, we emailed it a lot. We put it in workplace. We sent text. So part of it is just human condition. And
Yeah.
again, it like the reticular activator part of the brain is like what,
Yeah.
when you are shopping for a new car, you see that car
Yeah.
everywhere,
Yeah.
something like that. So I think part of it is like, look, our reptilian brain keeps us alive by focusing on,
Yeah.
not getting eaten by the saber-toothed tiger. And that translates into business. Like, okay,
Yeah.
how do I close this deal? How do I close this deal? So unless you're looking for that solution,
Yeah.
you typically don't really listen for
Mhm.
it
Yeah.
until you need it. Right. And then all of a sudden it's like, where do I find this? Where do I find this? Where do I
Yeah.
look for this?
Yeah, I love that answer, and I truly believe. I mean, I think it's a matter of personal experience, past experience, and a matter of personal perspective, right? So, if you were to tell me, hey, there is a company, they are so tech heavy that agents are feeling overwhelmed, I would jump in. I would say, like, I want that company, I want it now, and I want to see why are they so tech heavy and what do they have. Versus someone else, they might be like, oh, tech heavy, no, 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 right? So it's a lot to do with past experience, but if we allow our past experiences to define our future, we know how that will end up, right? So, second question, and again, I'm running out of time here. So something else that I come across a lot for, even though I truly believe being in part of this company 2 years, I know there is no lack in that, but a lot of agents that I talk to, that's their perspective, is that lack of local support, right? Agents a lot of times worry about the absence of physical offices, right? Like we know that that's probably one of the biggest, I guess, bottlenecks for a lot of agents, or that's what keeps them stuck on the fence on jumping into the brokerage, right? So the sense of community or local support, what's your perspective on how should agents adapt when they come to EXP to get that local support, to get that, sense of community?
Yeah, so I'll answer two ways. One is like, from the broker side, it actually typically expands your support, right? Like if you're at a franchise with one office,
Hmm,
typically there's only one
that's
human
it.
being,
Yeah.
right? Versus, depending on the state you're in, we could have 10, 15 brokers in that state. And so
Yeah.
we have a system. So like literally every day of the week, you can get a question answered. You're not subject to someone being sick or on vacation or
Mhm.
anything else. So I would say that part of this increases.
Mhm.
So, point separate. And then when it comes to the local community, depending on the state, we could actually be one of the largest players in that local market. And
Mhm.
so there's a lot of local driven events. The cool thing that I've interpreted and experienced is that we actually at this company enjoy or treasure the in-person in real life events more than when you had it at the local office.
Yeah.
And again, I was at a at a franchise for my whole career. And towards the end, I never set foot in there, right? Like for the longest time, the only reason I went in was to pick up my checks until we got them delivered electronically.
Yeah.
And so I would ask people what it is they're looking for, right? And that's where the cool part of in real life for us comes into play, where it's like, look, when we're actually in real life is typically for like education or sharing, right? So it's like I get to see people because we're at a mastermind or at a live event. And that's very different than like the Tuesday sales meeting where someone's going to try to sell me something.
Yeah. No, for sure. Like a lot of, I believe EXP provides for both, right? Meaning if you are a new agent, you need the hand holding, you need that local support, you need to go into the office, go join a team that is part of EXP, right? And yes, with that will come, you probably pay more commission, right? You pay more in splits. But then when you become independent, when you become capable and you don't need that hand holding anymore, you can become independent and you can operate on cloud, just like we do. I run a team here in Michigan completely remotely, not as focused on growing the team anymore because of our academy. But now, last questions, and I promise we'll end here, is that what is the biggest struggle that you see agents facing moving forward in this new economy, right? I'm talking about actual economy, right? And how do you feel agents, real estate business owners should be adapting in this market?
So you said economy, so I'll answer it the way I understood it, right? So we just experienced the worst year we've had in 30 years, right? Worse than '08 in 2023 from a transaction count. So we're actually I was actually thinking about writing a post about this, but I will say something controversial, which is that we're actually in a real estate recession. And not as in '08 of prices. We're as an industry, we're in a recession of transactions, right? So if you look over a 50-year period, 7 million is the high watermark-ish between resale and new construction, and that was 2021 and 2006. We just did barely 4 million last year, and we're on track to do the same this year. That was '09 and like 1992, right? Yeah. So just saying it out loud, it's like, wait, that's not true. Prices haven't gone down.
Yeah. I think there was a stat that just came out yesterday that showed we have the lowest transaction in the past 2 decades or something like that.
Oh yeah, no, it's that.
Yeah.
So first of all is understanding that. And so the one thing I will say to people, it's like, first of all, knowing that actually gives you a lot of power, because I think there's a ton of people in our industry. And there was I think a poll, I think Inman did it a couple months ago, that said 54% of agents are thinking of switching brokerages this year. Wow. And I think that's coming from, and that's across the board. So like no one's exempt, right? And I think that's coming from, oh my God, I'm having a horrible year.
Yep.
Something's wrong with me. If I make a change, I will fix it, right? And so the first thing I always say to people is like, know your numbers. Because like, I'll give you an example. Let's say you did 100 transactions in 2021 or 2022, and then you went into 23 and you dropped to 90 or 80. And then in 2024, you did 80 and you feel like you're dying or struggling compared to the previous year, but your market's actually down 40% from 2022 to 2024, and you did 80, you're actually outperforming the market by like 20%.
Yep.
Right. Yep. And so the two things to think about that. One is just appreciate that we're all in this struggle together.
Yeah.
But like I look at our macro numbers. So in transaction counts, we were down like everybody else, but our market share went up. We went from 3.8 transactions of all transactions in America to like 4.2 over one of the quarters. You can see it on the earnings calls. I talk about it in detail, right? So even though we did less transactions, we did more transactions as a company
compared to all other
compared to the market. Like so what I say to people is like, survive. That's actually the goal right now. And guess what? As the market, like you're actually getting more market share in your market during these lean years. And when we get back to more of a balanced market, which is probably somewhere between 5 to 5.5 million transactions, you will be a bigger agent than you were before. And it also weeded out, like one of the positives is you're now not competing with every Tom, Dick, and Harry who passed their test and like, oh, I'm going to go with my nephew who has sold 0 homes. Like, they're like, what's your marketing plan? You know, how do you deliver value? What's your net execution? All that kind of fun stuff. But I do have a hard stop.
Yep.
It was awesome spending some time with you.
Yeah, Appreciate that. Yeah, appreciate that. Appreciate all the value you bring and everything that you're doing on the background for us on behalf of the company. And again, thank you so much for spending the time together. Definitely looking forward to bringing you on maybe a few months later after this whole wave dies down a little bit.
Awesome. Take care.
Take care.